Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Worcestershire's Health and Wellbeing Board meeting today. For any new members, just to introduce myself, I'm Councillor Sachinda Bell, CMR for Health and Wellbeing Board. So we have got short and sweet agenda today, and we'll try and keep on time. Just to say, if you're talking, if you speak, then switch off your microphone after you stop speaking. And to start with, so we'll hear the apologies from Kate first. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, we've had apologies from Julian Burlett, but we have Sarah Speck attending for us. We've also had apologies from Dr. Sarah Raystrick, Councillor Shirley Webb, Councillor Andrew Wilmot, Councillor Juma Begum, Gary Woodman and David Mahaffey.
Thank you, Kate. Any declarations of interest to be made, please? So none. Any members of public we have today? No. Okay, thank you. So for confirmation of minutes from the last meetings, any points to make? None. So we can go ahead and sign that. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So next we have on our agenda is Worcestershire Safeguarding Adult Board Annual Report. Board sponsor is Mark Fitton, and it's presented by Prof. Keith Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just before, while Keith gets his seat, just really to say this Adult Safeguarding Board's report for 24-25 usually comes through this governance process alongside that of Cabinet as well, really. I won't say anything more, but hand you over to Keith, really, to just give an introduction to the report.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here today. I'm just going to make a few general comments about the report and then maybe have some discussion and some questions. Just actually come from this morning from the board's second annual Safeguarding Awards, where we were celebrating excellent practice within the community. 30-ish recipients, or maybe 25 recipients of awards this morning, including a trainee Tesco delivery driver who was commended for stopping his vehicle and when he saw a car on fire and rescuing a gentleman from the fire in the car and saving this person's life. And a nurse who was on her day off with her young daughter and saw a member of the public on a bridge in the moment and process of deciding whether to jump off the bridge, and managed to spend time to talk this person down and save this person's life. And I just think sometimes on a safeguarding board, when we spend most of our time dealing with tragedies and things that go wrong, sometimes good to remember that we have many colleagues and members of the public that do fantastic work and sometimes go a little bit unrecognised. So that's where I was this morning, and really good to be there. Just generally about adult safeguarding, it's fair to say that generally what I would call the volume of the business gets wider and deeper all the time. I'm old enough and been around long enough to remember the days when we didn't even talk about child abuse, we talked about non-accidental injuries. And in those days, in the 1970s and 80s, it was a stranger danger, and over 10 years we started to recognise the scale and the breadth, and that actually a lot of the problems were caused within families. I think that's very similar now to our understanding of adult safeguarding. It's much broader and wider, and coercive control is now much better understood. And we're also recognising there's more and more issues to do within families, and I'll come back to that in a moment. We're still dealing with, I think, as a country and as a board here, issues around people's understanding of mental capacity, particularly around executive function. Far too many people are still assuming that capacity is binary. Either you have capacity to consent or you don't. And that is not usually the case. Sometimes people have some capacity, but not all sorts of capacity, or to make complex decisions. and that does cause a problem. And in too many cases and too many safeguarding adult reviews that we deal with a misunderstanding of the Mental Capacity Act is still an issue. And I'm saying that here because we've obviously got a Health and Wellbeing Board and a Health Board. I do urge us all as health colleagues to particularly be more cognizant of the Act in terms of getting consent for treatment and consent for the way people are cared for. I mentioned earlier about coercion and coercive control. It's particularly becoming apparent now, the world of fraud. As some of you know, I lead the National Research into Fraud and Exploitation with the Economic Crime Team in London. I'm doing a lot of national work at the moment on fraud within carers. A number of people have been paid carers who resign their contract with the local authority or the health authority, become private carers, and then end up being sole beneficiaries of people's wills. I've had a number of cases like that recently. I'm trying to do some work on that. So these are sorts of issues that we need to increasingly keep our eyes attuned to. On a more positive note with this report, we talked about the CALM framework, the Complex Adult Risk Management Framework that started a few years ago. It's my view that it's an exemplary piece of work in the country. I mentioned this to the CQC inspectors a couple of weeks ago, that they actually should use this as an exemplar of excellence. The CALM framework is used for residents, people who are some of the most difficult to reach people, people often with alcohol problems, drug problems, other complex issues. And the CALM coordinator and the CALM process has been really successful in engaging with, meeting with, and supporting some of the most complex and difficult people in your community. And I think it really is something to be highly commended here. I think the rest of the report speaks for itself. I've no doubt you might have some questions about some of the numbers or the changes or the developments, but I'll pause at that point and happily take any discussions or any questions from anybody.
Thank you, Prof. Brown. Any questions, please?
Somebody ask one, please. I've driven a long way and just phoned in from Lanzarote. Literally.
It's really some feedback. At a previous meeting, Keith, you talked to us about the exposure of vulnerable adults to doorstep crime, scams, internet fraud. And that inspired us as we were designing our Healthy Worcestershire programme, which is now rolled out across 30 venues across the county with over 1,000 people attending each week. You inspired us to include that as part of the Healthy Worcestershire programme. So yes, we do physical activity with people there. We address social isolation. We address traditional public health issues like weight management. But the sessions that we've done on scams and fraud, etc., always go down a storm. And some of the stories that we've heard from people about their experiences. And in fact, when Professor Chris Whitty, CMO, came to visit one of our Healthy Worcestershire sessions, it just happened that week we were talking at that session about crime and fraud. And he was really impressed that we were including that in the full sphere of health. So it was really a thank you from us, actually, because it was that conversation with you that inspired that. And I just wanted to give you feedback that it's really become an integral part of our programme and really valued by the participants, and it's an increasingly important issue.
Thank you very much. Something must be sticking on because I'm on BBC Hereford and Worcester quite a lot, so there's some sort of link going on because they keep ringing me up to speak on radio. So it is critical, isn't it? I mean, the impact on people's health and their well-being and their psychological health is massive if they're defrauded. And I think we as society sometimes underestimate the impact, particularly on older people who have retired from work. If they lose their savings, they don't really have much chance to recover from that position. And it really is very, very devastating. In fact, on another day in another lecture, when I'm not lecturing here, it'd be interesting to do a little sum, wouldn't it? How many older people need to be scammed of their life savings, end up losing the confidence to live in their own homes, come into care, therefore becoming the cost of the council because they've no savings before the council's bankrupt type number. And it's probably not very many, is it?
Chris Roberts, Citizens of Icebury. Couldn't agree more. I think there's this perception, isn't there, that scamming is something that happens to people who aren't very bright. And I suspect a number of us in this room have been scammed at some point, or certainly come close to it. And you're right, it completely undermines people. But I'm also aware that we've been seeing a growth. You were talking about carers and estates and things that happen. We're also seeing those internal family situations again, which kind of brings you back to what you were saying at the beginning, where you've got children putting incredible pressure on individuals to sell the house, sign stuff over. And you're right, we'll be sitting with a client, and we're very good at working with clients and kind of deducing a level of capacity. And whilst there may be a little bit of confusion about some things, they have very clear sense of what it is they want and what they don't want. But it's really difficult because often their carers are their voice, they're their eyes, their ears, and you know it's not quite like they've escaped and got to us, but it feels like that sometimes. So no, great work you're doing, and just
so of course the interesting thing there, Chris, is if you look at the language that was just used then, the carer's view of what they want. And of course, an attorney, by law, is meant to act on behalf of the person and represent the person's views, not their personal views. And I think that is just still not properly understood. We were just having a conversation over coffee outside, and I think we've probably got further to go with that. The thing I said outside over coffee was, choose your attorney carefully. You know, that has to be the number one priority, to remind people that, you know, if you are asking somebody to act on your behalf when you no longer can advocate for yourself, that is a very serious position that you're in. And so that's number one, choose your attorney carefully, but also to remind attorneys that it's not what they think is right, is what the person would have wanted. And we also need to remind all other professionals when they start to... The term best interest decisions, I think I've mentioned this before here, is a problem in my view in the Act, because too many professionals think that means, as a professional, I'm telling you what is in your best interest because I know best because I'm the professional. That is not what it means. It means understanding what the person would have wanted and what their wishes would have been, and just trying to ascertain that. So really critical, these things, and I think we're still in the foothills of trying to understand that fully. Come back to your point about being scammed. Yes, we've all potentially been victims of scams, and maybe some of us have. But we're probably learned enough so that if we are a victim, we don't become a repeat victim. We do something about it, and we lick our wounds and think how foolish or stupid we were, and we put in protection mechanisms. Of course, many older people, lonely older people, people in the early stages of cognitive decline, sometimes don't even know they've been a victim. And let's be really clear, that's exactly the people that the criminals target. Yeah, they call them suckers for a reason, and they sell suckers lists on the dark internet. And I can buy for you the names of local residents who are vulnerable in the early stages of cognitive decline that criminals will use to target the most vulnerable people on your streets around you. They're easily available on the internet. And that's why we've got to redouble our efforts. And it's really fantastic that you've had so many people turn up at these workshops and whatever. In a sense, the really harder part is how do we help and support those people that aren't able to turn up to those workshops and are the most hidden in our communities and societies that we hardly ever hear from.
Thank you.
Simon Adams from Healthwatch Worcestershire. While you're here, Keith, I, along with anybody else who's probably over 65 in the room, has been put on notice by their banks that they won't be allowed to draw very much cash, right? Or even if they go down to a branch, they won't be able to draw without an appointment more than £1,000. It does occur that there's a bit of a gap there in the sense that, but I can quite happily carry out a scam transfer for £25,000, £30,000 online. And there doesn't seem to be any protection put in at that sort of level for people. So whilst you're here with your national hat on, could you take that away? And also note that I really do, when I'm expected to work to 67 and beyond, object to being told what I can do with my money at 65. Some of us think it smacks more of controlling our preference for paying people in cash.
Sure. It's what would we call maybe the law of unintended consequences. Some of you will know that I started in 2015 my campaign with the government to bring about what we now know as the banking protocol. So you'll now get up to £85,000 of any money back from a bank if you're defrauded. That took me 10 years. One of the unintended consequences of that now is that banks becoming slightly more careful and reluctant to let you take monies out when you might want to take monies out in case you are being defrauded, and therefore they've got to pay the money back, if that makes sense. So that's why you've now got increasing levels of sophistication going on about how you spend money or take money as part of their trying to manage that themselves. Because let's be clear, the amount of money that the banks are having to pay back are in the order of hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. The really good part about the banking protocol, from my perception, was that we were able to insert a clause so that if you lose £20,000, your bank pays you back half the money, and the bank that received the £20,000 pays you back half. So the banks are incentivized now to stop criminals having accounts and having money go through, if that makes sense. And that is working pretty effectively. And I think the banking system now at trying to stop fraud going on in those areas is quite big. That's why criminals are now doing things like becoming sole beneficiaries of wills and these sorts of things, because it's a more legal route for them to take your money than full-on fraud. It's still fraud, but you understand what I mean by that.
But my point was about, if you don't mind, is about doesn't seem to be any restriction on the size of the online transaction you can make.
£25,000 is normal, isn't it?
Yeah, but that compares with being prohibited from drawing £300 in cash from a cash machine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Aycock, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Keith. I'm Councillor Sue Aycock. Loneliness, you've just talked about loneliness. Mm-hmm. I've set up a Healthy Worcestershire with the help of Lisa. And one of the most notable things that's come to light is people being on their own, the loneliness, and how it affects their mental health. Mm-hmm. It's something that they don't like to speak about, but coming to this group each week, doing activities, they're opening up and talking about how mental health being on their own affects them. Because of this, I've now got the go-ahead to set up a community hub for these residents and for other residents in other areas to meet each week, have coffee, talk about problems, letter writing. I'm even getting citizens' advice involved, and they'll be able to do activities as well. It's all about bringing this community, and that they know they're not actually out on their own. There's always somebody there each week to talk to. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing that. I mean, clearly loneliness is probably one of the biggest issues in our society that goes undetected and underreported the most. One of my most salutary experiences was when I was leading the national research looking at call blocking technology, and we had a large grant from Central Government Department of Communities, and we were asked to install call blocking technology into older people, lonely older people who'd previously been scammed on the telephone. And my job and my team's job was to go in retrospectively and ask them how the call blocking technology did improve their well-being. And it was the most complex and disastrous piece of research I've ever done, because when we went back to visit these people, we discovered that a significant proportion of them who had previously been getting 5, 10 or 20 phone calls from criminals a week started to get no calls at all because they were screened out. So they disconnected the call blocking technology, because the reality was they'd rather speak to a criminal than nobody. Such was the power of loneliness. And that to me was just a massive learning point that we just need to take on board in all of our public health well-being discussions. Loneliness is a major, major impediment to having anything like a normal, fulfilling life.
Thank you, Professor Brown. I'm glad you mentioned about grey areas in Mental Capacity Act and the assessment and the challenges we face inside the hospital and outside in the community as well. So my understanding is that as much you can involve the family carers and the multidisciplinary teams to counter that. Is there anything else you would suggest, any different approach to it to overcome those challenges so we can get the possible best outcome at that point, a fair assessment?
Thank you. I think I'd first of all urge us all to seriously consider, do we have our own lasting power of attorney health and welfare registered? Then those decisions don't occur because the attorney can speak on your behalf. Do we have, I could ask, show of hands almost, couldn't I? How many people in this room have their own LPA health and welfare registered? 2. Okay? So, you know, that does mean that if any of us on the way home today have a car crash, a brain injury, a stroke or whatever, there's no legal person to act on our behalf. And we're in the business of it because we're at the Health and Wellbeing Board. I mean, that's pretty shocking, actually, isn't it? Is it not? You know, surely we should be leading by example and saying to everybody out there, get your lasting power of attorney health and welfare registered. Forget the money, don't worry about the money. But who's going to speak on your behalf if you're on an intubator, if you're not able to advocate on your behalf? There are legal processes. Do that, do think about advanced decisions, refuse treatment, and then we can start moving on to how do we make appropriate best interest decisions, include the relatives. But we must, as a society, understand the Mental Capacity Act, why it came about, the rationale, that's the whole lecture, but understanding that and why we need to use it more effectively. And I hope this is a board, Health and Wellbeing Board, could take that on board. Maybe that could be my second challenge to you. After the fraud one, let's have the next campaign, register your LPAs. There's a couple of people wanted to come back on me on that, I think.
I just wanted to say, just to contextualise it, it occurred to me that actually, because my children are 40 with children, I actually said to them, it matters more that you have one where you are in your stage of life than I've got one at my stage of life. Because actually, you know, the implications of switching me off are much less than they are in terms of switching you off, in terms of practical implications. So they tend to think it's an old person's world, not a young person's or middle-aged person's world.
So
they see me as old. I know you're not going to agree with me on the bit about, you know, but that's my training.
I caught Simon outside for a coffee, and I think he's going to come to my lecture tomorrow in the morning, and that's my second slide. For those of us that haven't bothered with our own LPAs, that have children over the age of 18, we still see ourselves as mothers and fathers of those children. How would you feel tomorrow if your adult child was in that situation and you thought, oh, I'm the next of kin because I'm mummy or daddy, to realise that the term next of kin is meaningless in law and you have no oversight legally as to what happens? Part of that campaign needs to remind people that when you turn 18, you need to think about your lasting power of attorney, health and welfare. You don't know what you might take at university. You don't know what might happen to you when you have a motorbike crash. You don't know what might happen if you have an unexpected brain bleed in your 20s. And you're right, Simon, for the mothers and fathers of those people, it is so traumatizing to realize that you haven't got that parental right anymore because your child is now an adult, not a child. Whereas when we've reached, and I'm the same age as you, I think, Simon, 65. No, I'm older, sorry. Okay, we think it doesn't matter so much because we're at the far end of life.
Simon, we never switch you off, don't worry about it. So the citizens of Iceby are actually exploring trying to do a campaign next year called Prepare for Care, because
Brilliant.
We've had some really good conversations with everybody involved in sort of care homes, etc. And you're absolutely right, it's this kind of denial of anything that smacks of death, old age, whatever. I'm still young and vital. So we really want to push this kind of looking at care costs, helping people get over this, I am not going into care, whatever, to realise, again, it's not a black and white, it's not a binary thing, there's scales of care and support, things you can do to prevent it, but also LPAs are a big part of that. So.
Well, I've written the national guidance on LPAs and advanced decisions to refuse treatment and advanced care planning, and they sit on our board website. If you want to download them and use them, you're welcome to.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Just, is that a national campaign or local?
No, it's a local one. It's an idea. We haven't got any resources yet, but it's just one of those. We love to try and get in ahead of issues.
Okay, so you set me a challenge. Can't resist. So so why don't we commit to work public health, citizens' advice? We'll obviously work with our adult social care colleagues and the board, Safeguarding Adults Board, to to really go big on raising awareness of this in Worcestershire.
Fantastic.
And let's see what we can achieve. And I think that would be one action we take away. I've just got one other question. Yeah. Safeguarding Adults Boards always do, I think, a brilliant job of learning from when maybe things have gone wrong, drawing out really detailed lessons. Are we learning? My question is, are we learning enough from success? I'm a big believer that when something goes wrong, we always are keen to learn from it, quite rightly. I believe there's a lot of lessons to be learned from when things go right, and talking to the person at the end of that process who feels things went right for them, to dig into that and what happened that worked well for you. And you mentioned awards earlier. Have we got the balance right there, do you think? Are we doing enough to learn from success?
Probably not. I'm sorry, just also reflecting, it's so good for me to come and to present this paper, because actually it's meeting and getting these campaigns and these ideas together. It's actually the most useful thing to do. Are we learning enough from our success? Probably not. What I thought today was useful was there was a reporter there from the Worcester News Time, what's it called? Yeah. Worcester News, and he was taking notes, and then he spent time afterwards while folks were having some food to take more details of their stories, to share those stories and to publicise those stories. So I think we need to do more, because I think the advantage, as you're rightly, I think, hinting, is that success can often breed more success, because it's quite motivating rather than demotivating of dealing with all the mess all the time. But on the flip side, I think what still frustrates me, is that a good word, is that we're still sometimes learning the same lessons. Yes. And we need, I reached a point recently where I thought I needed to do a national campaign, if I dared or had the energy for it, to go around to British universities and say, what on earth is going on in your training of healthcare professionals and social care professionals? Because for 10 years we've been finding the same problems of a lack of understanding of the Mental Capacity Act. Now, it was almost like my campaign's going to be, prove to me that you teach it, prove to me that you assess it, because I'm not sure you can be doing, because all the evidence of all these reports are that it's still not understood. Now, I wasn't able to do that, although I did a little bit of it with the British Medical Association. So I think we need to do both. Yes. We need to learn from things, and I think we're quite good as a board at having our learning audits and our drives, but it's more, the real question is, how do we check that the learning points that we've put out there have been absorbed and taken on board? And that's a lot harder. Yeah. And clearly we're not as successful as that as we probably would like to be, because if we were, we'd stop having the same issues cropping up, would we not? Yeah. But that, I don't think, is anything that we can do on our own. And it's the real advantage, I think, the more I reflect on this, about us working together between this board, the Safeguarding Board and Community Safety Partnership. How do we come together and work out what our priorities are going to be and say, right, we're going to focus on this period of time. and we're all going to put our oar into this and try and make a difference in that community. And actually, you're absolutely right. It is about a much broader understanding of what does public health mean, what does well-being mean, what does good communities look like, and how do we serve those communities to our best.
Thank you, Chair. Right, complex adult risks. The growing increase of drug abuse and alcoholics in all our areas. We know help is offered to them, but what about the people that they affect through their actions? What help is available? I'm dealing with residents who are being affected by this issue, and some of them are having counselling. Others are going to the doctors, police, other agencies, but they're getting nowhere. The help seems to be for people with drug abuse and that, but there's no help for the people who are suffering because of their abuse. Thank you.
A very well-made point. You're right. There is not enough help for the associated, can I call them victims of those behaviours? How many children fundamentally suffer because of the behaviour of their parents and the associated adults around them? How many adults suffer coercive control? I mean, these are languages, these words that we've only started to use in the last few years. The domestic violence bill is relatively new on the statute books. It's not that many years ago where, dare I say it, you know, we'd have almost said that, you know, if a man beats his wife, it's maybe not acceptable, but that kind of happens behind closed doors, and what are we to do to go in there and ask or check or to question it? Well, clearly we would today. We're in a much more enlightened position and understanding of these things, but we've got still a long way to go in these areas. And you're right, you're hitting the nail on the head here. There are multiple tragedies and victims around these sorts of problems. Now, the complex adult risk management process is a really good process of trying to engage with people that are living those complex lives to try and ensure they get services and treatment and are helped. And again, one of the awards that was given today was for someone who took a very, very complex case of a rough sleeper homeless person who was not engaging with anybody, but through her tenacity to build a relationship with this person, she was able to get that person rehoused and stop that trauma and that cycle of trauma. But it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort just to work with the person, let alone all the people that person knows around them. And, well, we might need a bigger budget. That's a bit political.
Thank you. Any other questions or points to be made?
Pleasure.
For presenting this report and sharing those examples, the real-life examples there and all the experience. And the points made in the floor. So basically, it does highlight certain issues, which I think refreshes our insight on, you know, dying in poverty, living in isolation in advanced years, and some good projects being done. And I think it's, again, food for thought for us from public health to join up and do more. Thank you for your participation.
My pleasure. And the offer's always there to come and assist you. And I think in public health, I'd be very happy to.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay.
So, moving on agenda, next we have is Worcestershire Safeguarding Children Partnership Annual Report 24-25. Board sponsor is Adam Johnson and presented by Gareth Morgan. Thank you.
Good afternoon. For those that know me, I'm Gareth Morgan. I am the chair of, or the current chair of the Worcester Children's Safeguarding Partnership Executive Board. I'm here today to provide a summary of the Worcester Safeguarding Children's Partnership Annual Report covering the period April 24 to March 25. Amendments made by the Children's Social Act in 2017 to the Children's Act in 2004 strengthened this already important relationship by placing new duties on the police, integrated care boards and the local authority as statutory safeguarding partners. Safeguarding partners are under a duty to make amendments to work together and with other partners locally, including education providers and childcare settings, to safeguard and promote the welfare of all children in their area. This includes our appointment recently of an independent scrutineer, Rachel Egan, whose role is to drive continuous improvement and provide assurance that arrangements are working effectively for children, families and practitioners. The report sets out how the three safeguarding partners within Worcestershire, which is the Council, the Integrated Care Board and West Mercia Police, have worked together to safeguard and promote the welfare of children. The partnership report is made publicly available on the partnership website and has recently been presented to the lead safeguarding panel. This transparency, including the presentation of the report today, are crucial in providing reassurance to our communities, parents and children that we have their best interests at heart. The year has been one of significant transformation, with Working Together to Safeguard Children's Statutory Guidance published in December 2023, requiring us to review and adapt our local arrangements. These changes were delivered on time by December 2024 and are now embedded in the way that we operate. National reports from the Children's Safeguarding Practice Review Panel also shaped our priorities, particularly around interfamilial sexual abuse, race and racism in safeguarding, children with disabilities and serious safeguarding incidents. Within the reporting period, we've carried out work against a number of priorities. Firstly, Get Safe, which is the Worcestershire name for our multi-agency support and protection for children at risk of exploitation. Earlier last year in 2024, the strategic group paused for a while to realign its priorities. However, an operational group continued to coordinate frontline responses to exploitation, ensuring no loss of safeguarding delivery. We recently met, and the realigned focus of Get Safe will look to understand and respond to serious youth violence and violence outside the home. As this has been a significant focus of the joint targeted area inspections nationally, as too many children are carrying weapons because they feel unsafe and see this as a form of protection. Serious youth violence has a wide impact across communities, and a failure to consistently identify serious youth violence as a safeguarding issue is leaving too many children at risk of serious harm. That is why we have aligned our focus on this area. Secondly, the role of our Quality Assurance Practice and Procedures Group, our QAP, is to support the improvement and development of services in Worcestershire by delivering a multi-agency programme of quality assurance through focusing on key areas of audits, survey user feedback and key performance indicators. This group led the response to the Alfie Steele Child Safeguarding Practice Review, where they developed and monitored a robust action plan, issued targeted learning briefings and embedded new practice standards around issues such as conformity bias, physical abuse and child protection medicals. They also oversaw the local implementation of Working Together 2023 reforms, strengthening links with schools and the voluntary sector. Thirdly, our Child Safeguarding Practice Review Group oversees the management of rapid review processes and the commissioning of children's safeguarding practice reviews within Worcestershire, and is also responsible for ensuring that child safeguarding practice reviews are completed to a high standard and within agreed timescales, and that those recommendations and learning resulting from these reviews are fully implemented. The group have embedded learning through the Keep Me Safe programmes, for example, on infant crying, reducing head trauma, and developing a new resource on dog safety. They have produced system-wide training, conducted audits across health providers. Thematic reviews focus on parenting capacity, mental health and engagement with the Gypsy, Roma and travelling families. The group have commissioned an independent reviewer to undertake a comprehensive analysis of safeguarding activity between September 2019 and December 2024. This is including 20 rapid reviews, 6 child safeguarding practice reviews and correspondence from the national panel. The final report will be completed during the 2025-26 reporting period, with findings and insights from the review guiding improvements in local safeguarding practice, with a continued focus on preventing harm and improving outcomes for Worcester's children and families. Finally, it is important to recognise the significant contribution and place that the Education Head Teacher Safeguarding Steering Group has in meeting our objectives. Schools remain key partners, and as such, the group consists of representatives of the Worcester phases of educational settings, providing quality assurance in the safeguarding work of the education sector across Worcestershire, and importantly, a direct link for that work into the wider safeguarding partnership. The group improved threshold decisions at the family front door, with referrals from schools showing stronger alignment to safeguarding levels than any other agencies. They have also strengthened responses to bullying and peer-on-peer harm, enhanced online safety provision, and ensuring every school participated in the safeguarding audit. When we discuss funding, the partnership continues to be jointly funded by the Council, the NHS and West Mercia Police, with contributions rising in line with inflation. Business support and family front door remain key funding priorities. In summary, the partnership has continued to strengthen safeguarding arrangement, respond to national learning and embed reforms locally. There has been clear progress, but the report is candid that more needs to be done to ensure learning is consistently embedded across all agencies and that we can evidence the real impact on children and families. As such, our priorities for the reporting year are: as an executive group, we are committed to improving how we identify and respond to domestic abuse affecting children. We recognise children as victims in their own right and aim to strengthen professional awareness and targeted support. Embedding a new strategic focus on serious youth violence. And we will support partners to understand the changes to the Children's Wellbeing Bill and develop these into enhanced local practice. The panel today is asked to note the progress made by Worcester Safeguarding Children's Partnership, consider the annual report, and decide whether any particular areas of safeguarding work require further scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. Any questions, please? Yes, Councillor Bowen.
Good afternoon. Councillor Bowen. I'm the CMR for Children and Families on Worcestershire Council. In terms of your focus for this year, obviously you didn't mention child sexual exploitation. So in June, Baroness Case's national audit on group-based child sexual exploitation came up with 12 really important recommendations. Has any work yet been done in terms of implementing those recommendations across the partnership? Thank you.
Thank you, very good question. So specific work around that will be picked up by our Quality Assurance Board as part of their early work in 2026 to understand and audit the work of not only the partnership but the wider elements that sit within it. Where our Get Safe group specifically works on the exploitation of young children, so that work and a lot of those recommendations sits within it. However, I think it's really important for QWOP to look at that group and the wider partnership and understand what we are doing and are we hitting all those recommendations. What I've noted from the recommendations, which I think is an area of improvement for us, is the reach into the wider partnership. So recommendation 11 talks around licensing of taxis, out-of-area taxis, and the regulations around that, of which as a safeguarding partnership we don't own and don't reach into. So for me, we need to be reaching into our CSPs, working with them in order to highlight some of the concerns that we may have and see how we can contribute to any of those recommendations through that bit. So some of those recommendations do sit outside our scope. However, it's important for us to understand that and reach into those partners, of which I will be taking up.
So just one follow-up on that, really. Thanks for that, particularly around the work around taxes. So, if you like, could I ask that in those particular focus, I mean, the three key principles, really, of the audit, that the audit found, were one about the recording of ethnicity of perpetrators and the importance of that. Secondly, about that information sharing so that patterns can be spotted. And then thirdly, making sure that the safety of children is the paramount concern above all other factors, including community sensitivities. Could I ask that those key principles are really taken forward in terms of the review of processes and procedures?
An interesting rhetorical question there, because of course we will. So two of those 3 points were on the back of a 2009 report, I believe, into this very area, which then wasn't picked up, which was then picked up by Baroness Casey in the recent report. Some of those elements do get picked up and are doing very well with regards to Get Safe. However, for me, that's where our QWOP needs to look at it and fully assure us and yourselves that that work is being picked up and where. So I will come back to you.
Thank you, Gareth. Any more questions? Yes, Councillor Hickok.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the prevention of children getting knives in the schools. Did the police take a role in going around the schools, advising the children not to either get involved or buy knives? We had 2 stabbings not far from where I live, and one of them did involve a young person. So what advice are the police offering the schools to try and stamp out knife crime in our areas?
Thank you. Firstly, terrible news around the 2 stabbings in your area, especially if they involve young people. That's exactly why one of our focus areas has changed for this year, recognising the increase nationally and, unfortunately, we're seeing it here at home, aren't we? The prevalence of violence and the use of weapons. The police itself do play a major part in this with regards to supporting the educational framework coming into schools, supporting teachers, passing on those messages and providing some of that advice, and that will continue. We will also support some of the national campaigns like OPSECTA with regards to raising awareness and seizing of knives. So that will particularly focus around the schooling activity as and when those campaigns come up. But we do note that and as a wider partnership with regard to Children's Safeguarding Partnership, we do recognise this just isn't a siloed piece of work with regards to police itself, and that's why I'm happy to say that the 4th strand of the partnership involves the schools themselves, and that we can get into all the schools in Worcestershire and have that 2-way dialogue on how we can educate and prevent children from feeling as though they need to carry knives in order to either protect themselves or to enact any violence. The Get Safe partnership as well, those 2 cases that you do discuss, they were discussed at length in partners at Get Safe, and some measures put in place with regards to those individuals in order to try and steer them away from exploitation. That was taken as a 2-fold approach. One, in order to reduce the exploitation or the appeal for that individual, and then the other end was in order to identify and remove those people that were looking to exploit the young people, and that work continues within Worcestershire.
Thank you, Gareth. Any other questions? Yes, Lisa.
My question is about leaders in the community. I really appreciate the focus on violence by young people, and particularly the focus on knife crime. I think sometimes the way we talk about knife crime, and maybe especially the way some of the media talk about knife crime, is sometimes unhelpful. I was having a great conversation with Pete Martin, who is a chap in Redditch, who's one of the most inspirational people I've ever met in my life. I don't argue with him because he's got a black belt in about 10 martial arts, but his dedication to working with young people, especially in areas where there are real social challenges, is just amazing. And one thing he's observed is that a lot of knife crime is fueled by young people carrying knives, of course, in the first place, and they're carrying knives because they're scared. And I think, one thing I've noticed, the last year of data, the overall knife offences have dropped in Redditch by 15%. And he was actually interviewed by the BBC. So to what extent are we connecting up with people like Pete Martin and others who are deeply embedded in the heart of their communities and work with young boys and girls, helping them not just deal with the the fear they have about knife crime, but also helping them deal with the social issues that underpin a lot of this.
Thank you. Media unhelpful. I don't believe you. No, the sensationalisation of night crime in all media formats, whether that's news, music, film, video games, has had a significant impact, hasn't it, on the way that our children are developing and note violence. The use or the carrying and the use of weapons are seen as something that, well, they don't really understand the impacts of the use of them, do they? Because on these things, there's usually a good news story at the end, and their lives can get turned completely upside down by it. And the work that you described there, and those leaders within the communities, there is a lot of work said through our Get Safe partnership and through some of the wider, if I take the police on itself, the wider policing functions into getting into communities, understanding who those leaders are and bringing it in, because let's be honest, no one wants to talk to a cop. So we recognise that, and we understand that we aren't the best people to have those conversations. What we need to do, we need to act as an enabler and unblock some of those issues, and also to perhaps provide that link in between those individuals with the community and into those commission services of that, what we've got that reach and into the wider CSP. So as a safeguarding partnership, we're here to understand what some of those issues are and try and facilitate those and raise that awareness amongst the partners and through the chief exec. So we do that where we can. We must continue to build on some of those successes as you've described there in Redditch, and albeit we probably don't believe the stats to a certain degree of the 50% reduction, I'm pretty sure some of that work will change the direction of some use, and we will see a reduction in those that are carrying knives.
Yeah, just come back on that. I think we've got a real opportunity in places like Redditch now, because of course the Pride in Place initiative has just landed with significant investment, and I really, really hope that there is a big focus within those projects on youth mental well-being, community safety for youth, knife crime, because that goes to the root of a place, doesn't it, really, the feel of a place. And I think there's so much potential there for community development work led by the communities themselves to start to tackle these issues. And while I have the same skepticism as you of some of the figures, when I saw the Redditch figures, it actually did make sense because of the amount of work that's actually going on there. And I would say about the media, I actually think our local media is really good in Worcestershire for this. Some of the more national media I do worry about, sort of maybe peddling fear, but actually some of our local media, including the BBC and the local newspapers, actually think do a really good job on reporting these issues. So community first, I guess, is my message. Let's be led by communities to try and get to the nub of some of these issues, and it sounds like you're doing that.
Thank you. And you said the Pride in Place initiatives and the funding are a real opportunity for us all. We've got one in Worcester that we're involved in and engaging with the partners. So I think that's something. And just Councillor Bowen, one of the recommendations, around the Katie report was SOC, treating CSC in line with SOC. It's one of the 10 crime types, which has been changed recently, I think, in the last 5 years with regards to serious organised crime. And I've just come away from a training session or this week with partners from the CSP and police with regards to the response to serious organised crime, how we can influence and impact our collective response. And the Pride in Place was mentioned by partners today. So it's very much on the forefront of everyone's thinking, probably because money was involved. But
Councillor Bowen, yes.
And I mean, these are important conversations. I mean, 20 years ago, I was running services for young offenders, trying to prevent them from reoffending. And one of the mistakes, if you like, that's been made in that period has been, in terms of knife crime and young people being drawn into SOC, is to focus on the negative. So we hear a lot about, for example, toxic masculinity. And the antidote to that was presented as teach them to be kind. Well, actually, no, it isn't. You've got to teach them positive masculinity. And you've got to give opportunities for young men to express themselves in really positive and empowering ways where they can channel what it is to be a young man so that they don't get drawn into all these things which end up causing irreparable harm. So, these are big conversations, and I think we've got to keep doing that. So,
Gareth, I just have a question for you. So from safeguarding, children's safeguarding, it's a complex, layered subject. There are barriers about how the concerns are raised. We all know evidence shows that children can be at abuse, and most closest people to them. So we've looked at recent news, this child who suffered abuse from the parents, and sadly that life is lost. And neighbors did not report because they thought they could be called racist. Is that a barrier in this county? Do you think there would be, and what could we do in training? Because training is the key, obviously. I know safeguarding concerns get raised in the hospitals, in the healthcare sector, or organizations where there is established training. But in the community side, how we can mitigate this, that people actually report it without being a fear of being called racist or anything like that, and these lives are not lost.
Thank you. I think that raising that awareness, if I take that, I think you're right, it's complex and multifaceted, and the education around it, our footprint needs to be on all areas, all touch points, where regards to those community members, those that you taught, those neighbours will engage conversations. These conversations and what they see will happen in passing when they're having their haircut, when they're gone to, say the doctors. And it's understanding what those issues are, where they can link in and how they can report them. And that support mechanism to it, I think, is how we're going to unpick it. Because you're right, there is perhaps an undertone amongst some people in the community that they will feel with regards to there's an ethnicity barrier there. Will they be accused? I think from a policing perspective and a criminal justice perspective, if I may talk from slightly on the wider criminal justice point, our job is to support them through that. We looked at the point earlier, didn't we, around those that might be homeless, or those that are not dealing drugs, they are drug addicted, and how the impact on those wider victims are, and we don't take into account of those. And what I mean by that is, with regards to those people that are coming forward, agencies need to understand and have mechanisms in place in order to support those that might be feeling that they can't come forward and feeling that they might be isolated with regards to raising some of those concerns. I think there might be nationally a bit of a tide in regards to that on some of the reviews, and changing some of those mindsets that might have historically been there. I think it's just incumbent on us is to ensure there's that wider educational piece and encourage people to come forward and support, especially some of the really tragic cases that we have seen, unfortunately.
Thank you. Any more points to be made or questions? In that case, thank you, Gareth, for presenting this report and your time and all the hard work.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, moving on the agenda. So next we've got a joint strategic needs assessment, and that's a report to be presented by Matt Fung and Cam Russell. Thank you. Sponsored by Health and Wellbeing Board, Lisa McNally.
Thank you, Councillor Bell, and it's great to be here again to present this year's JSNA with Cam. So we'll be talking through the paper briefly and obviously heading into any discussion points. So this year's JSNA provides an updated analysis of key areas of need and opportunity through 2025. Data-driven insights at neighbourhood level and county level have been used to inform community engagement, address health inequalities and improve health and well-being for all residents. And I think over the last year or two, we've really seen a step change and a step forwards in the use of intelligence to drive action, and that's really evident through the programmes and projects that are going on all across the county, both at county level and kind of local level as well. So the report showcases various intelligence resources which form a comprehensive and easily accessible suite of products, including the website that we'll talk about, local profiles, and dashboards. Included in this is an analysis of how our neighbourhood health metrics have moved on, alongside various approaches to addressing inequalities within those neighbourhoods and improving health and well-being using data analysis as a foundation. So just skipping on to paragraph 7, just to note that there is still a JSNA working group which meets quarterly, drawing together partners from across Worcestershire to shape needs assessments, share information and develop new insights into the population of Worcestershire. And many of the organisations that you represent here are represented at that group. So the report is split into 4 key sections. And just going on to section 1 really around data insights and resources. It's kind of a couple of years ago that we started the conversation about Worcestershire Insights. This is a resource that I would wholly recommend you have a look at if you haven't looked at it to date. It's literally used hundreds, if not thousands of times every month by every type of organisation and every type of person, commissioners, politicians, VCSC, etc. And predominantly, the data side of things, if we're focusing on that, is drawn out of Worcestershire Insights to literally help to populate funding bids or to really understand communities or to understand barriers to health and well-being that very local communities have as a problem, or even assets that they have within those areas. So do have a look at that website. It's a rich trove of information that could really help to understand the communities that you serve. There's a whole load of good news stories on that website as well that are updated regularly by Sam, who's sitting at the back here, and other members of the team. And that is a great place to see the impact of not only our projects and programmes of work, but other programmes as well across the system. JSNAs and reports and assessments and strategies are also on the site. So really, it is a one-stop shop for lots of different relevant information to help with whatever you're working on. So I want to pass it over to Cam now. He's going to take us through some top-level analyses from this year's JSNA. So over to you, Cam.
Thank you, Matt. Kick off with a rather flashy infographic which we produced for the slide deck. Doesn't come out quite so well in the smaller format here, but basically that infographic is saying that we've set up one place where you can go to for all your data and intelligence. And one of the key features of this is it pulls together a whole vast range of sources, and we've sort of filtered them through for sort of robustness and accuracy and so forth. And puts the data in the hands of people who need to use it, albeit local organisations, councillors, even members of the public in some cases. So we think this is quite a different way of organising a JSNA. We're only aware of a few other local authorities who adopted a similar approach. Now, I would acknowledge that we can, it's an ongoing task for us to make the data more and more accessible over time. So as we've developed this, we get feedback from people in order to make the data even easier to use. So to give you a flavour of the content of the website, we have half a dozen Worcestershire Insights dashboards. I'm not going to go through them all here, but probably the most important one is the Priority Neighbourhood resource. So I'll come on to the Priority Neighbourhoods a little bit later, but this resource enables you to look in detail at the geography, the mapping of the priority neighbourhoods that we've identified. and provides useful map and search functions. Another particularly useful dashboard is the GP population dashboard. So we, as working for the council, we tend to have a focus on resident population in our work. The NHS, on the other hand, may be more interested for certain purposes in who's registered with patients at GP practices in the area. So I think we've been doing quite a lot of work to work together with the NHS and understand the interactions between the registered and resident populations. So that dashboard is useful for that. In addition, on the website we have insights themed reports. So there are themed reports on things like children and young people, environment, health, housing, population. In public health, we always talk about determinants of health. So all these things are key to affecting people's health and well-being, and you can't separate that from the other things that are going on in society. So, for example, we also have crime in there. Now, one of the big benefits of this is that you can get data for all levels of geography throughout the county. So if you've got a particular locality, you can find out information about that. You can find out information about the district or the ward. And I think, you know, we make the data accessible, but that can start a conversation with us. So someone might look at the data and say, well, what does this actually mean? We can have a conversation. So when people come to us, they're not coming to us to say, can you give me the figures for X? They're coming to us to say, well, how do I use this information to develop my programs, for example? Now, also in the JSNA, and we do this every year, we look at an overview of population in the county. It's kind of a little bit repetitive because every year we say the population's going up, so it's gone up by a modest amount since 2021, about 2.7%. But the population of Worcestershire has been going up over many years and is continuing to do so, and part of which is about the attractiveness of Worcestershire as a place to live. People increasingly who work in the West Midlands conurbation want somewhere more pleasant to live, so they come in here and commute. Also renowned for quality of schools, etc., and quality of life. I myself, as someone who migrated from Sandwell in the West Midlands to Worcester, and that's improved the quality of life for me and my family, and other people are likewise. Anyway, moving on. The other story we keep telling is that the population is getting older, so the numbers of people aged 75 and over, 65 and over, have been increasing over the last 3 years. This again has been a long-term trend, and this is a matter of concern or a challenge at least for health and social care services in terms of managing demand. So we're seeing more and more people living with complex long-term conditions and more very elderly people who, for example, have had multiple falls, all of which are placing potential strains on the system. Moving on to paragraph 16, we've got a quick chart on population change and what's driving population change. From the chart, figure 2, it's showing that migration, both international and internal meaning from within the UK, or within the UK in this case, those are the big drivers of population change and have been ever since 2012. But just to mention, there's a lot of complexity behind a chart like this, because this is talking about net migration, so people move in and out all the time. So in fact, when we talk about net migration, it's the difference between numbers of people moving out and back in. So really, if you want to go into more detail about the story of migration, we've produced some district-level analysis, and that's at the website, and we've got the link in paragraph 16. So I was just talking about recent years just now, and if we look at population projections, which have only come out quite recently, and have only been updated quite recently, but once again they show an increase in the older population, particularly the 85-plus age group, whose numbers are projected to rise by about 50%. And that is shown in figure 3, turning over the page, or my page here anyway. So figure 3 just shows projected population change. Again, we've got increase in the older age groups, although interestingly, the 75 to 84 age group is projected to level off somewhat once we get past the mid-2020s. Now, you've got to be careful with a diagram like this because it started in 2022, but that's when the projections were produced from. So, in fact, when we come to discuss implications for particular services, you've always got to take a baseline year, which might be part way along this chart. But it's still very much the general trend that the population is getting older, and the overall numbers in the population are projected to increase, I believe, by about, is it about 5% over 10 years, something like that. Sorry, I may have lost that figure, but we can come back. So what is this data all for? Well, I think we as an intelligence team have changed our emphasis, because our first question is what action is likely to take place? What's going to change as a result of our data analysis? And the big decision we made back in 2023 is to start to look at data at a geographical level. Now, there's a theoretical justification for this in that a very large proportion of the determinants of health are linked very closely with where people live. So you've got housing, education, environment, you get the picture. It's all dictated quite largely on where you live. So rather than look at specific public health indicators and say, oh, is this bad in this area or is it bad in that area, we actually look at the area as a whole and say, well, you know, what as an area, how good is this for people living in that area in terms of promoting their health and well-being? So we eventually came up with an approach to looking at emergency hospital admissions data, because they're quite a good measure of unmet need in communities. So if people's needs in terms of prevention of ill health, access to health services, access to healthy food, a healthy environment, if those are limited, then the emergency hospital admissions in that area are likely to be higher in many cases. So with preventable, things that are preventable at a relatively early age, such as heart disease, respiratory conditions for under 75s, they tend to be more prevalent in areas where there is high level of unmet need. So to cut a long story short, in our analysis, we uncovered 14 priority neighbourhood areas. So these are areas whose emergency hospital admissions are significantly higher than the norm. Now, when I say significantly, I mean much more significantly. So in the statistical terminology, there's less than a 1 in 500 chance that these numbers came out at random. So you could basically say, you know, this is an area that's different. And what was very interesting about this is that we didn't plug anything in about deprivation. It was all about the emissions. And we found that 8 of the 14 areas were in Redditch, and we were quite surprised by this. That's something that maybe people might want to pick up on later. But moving on to the I just wanted to say, actually, just to emphasise that all these areas are in the 20% most deprived areas in England. So this is not a chart showing all the areas that are in that category, but it's showing the areas where there's a high level of emergency admissions. So it's areas that are deprived and also have a large degree of preventable health problems or that we've identified. So moving on, in terms of action, we've tended to push this through the district collaboratives. And we have a table here that's got an example of some actions that are taking place. Now, these actions, things like promoting health checks, immunisation, etc., they're things that happen anyway. But the difference our analysis gives is that it says, you know, you're best off focusing in and around those localities that I just referred to. So again, Redditch came up as having quite significant areas of need, and I must admit I was a little bit surprised by that, but then I'm not very familiar with Redditch. I'm sat in a desk in Worcester, so I think it may make sense to people who live in that town. And so a lot of our work has been sort of focused on Redditch. So we've done other types of similar analysis. So we've also looked at childhood priority areas, and perhaps very interestingly, we've been working closely with the ICB in helping deliver in the Neighbourhood Health Delivery Framework, which is something I always find hard to say, NHDF. And what we've done there is scaled our analysis down to primary care network level. So every primary care network has an area of need within it, area or areas of need within it, where they can focus activity. And for consistency's sake, we've used the same bar in terms of selecting areas. So they still have to be areas that have got significant unmet need, but in the context of the local PCN. So each PCN can then work, if they're working within those areas, they're helping to reduce inequality, basically. So I think that work's been progressing really well, and I think it's provided an excellent forum for joint working between intelligence teams at the ICB and within public health, and that is ongoing work that we're very much prioritising. So the third section, moving swiftly on, is about other types of data analysis we've been doing. And I think it's fair to say that during the COVID pandemic, we had very high quality data on a daily basis. So this has enabled us to pick up on exactly what was going on within our county. So that kind of process of looking at data on a regular basis to see if it's changing in any significant way is something we've carried forward post-pandemic, particularly when we look at things like mortality information and hospital admissions. So I've just got some examples here of how this kind of data is being used. Firstly, the We Are Westlands programme, which has won numerous awards, I believe. Is that right, Lisa? It was certainly won some very prominent local government chronicle. That was, wasn't it? Yep, that's it. So, so data was almost the starting point of this when we looked at healthy life expectancy within Droitwich and how it varied by area, and you had almost an up to 10-year gap between the Westlands area and sort of neighbouring parts of the town. So that was, you know, part of the process in going into Westlands. Other areas of ongoing data surveillance, I mentioned mortality. We've been looking at inequality in admissions, inequality in deaths from cancer. And we did notice in this year's data that the difference between death rates in the most deprived and least deprived areas had increased. So that was 1 year's data, so we're going to continue to keep an eye on that. But there did seem to be a growing inequality in cancer mortality. As an ongoing thing, we also monitor cardiovascular disease mortality. And again, that shows persistent inequalities, which have kind of stayed around about the same over the last few years, but nonetheless are very significant. And there are figures and charts within the report that show more detail. And finally, we've been monitoring the childhood weight, so that's measured through a national survey called the National Child Measurement Programme. And we're doing fairly well on that, and that we're sort of similar or slightly lower than England for childhood obesity and overweight. However, the figures still remain above where they should be in a sense, and above where they were before the COVID pandemic. So there is definitely still work to do there, and that's being progressed by a team within public health. Just going to hand back over to Matt for a bit of a flavour of our key public health programmes. Thank you.
Thanks, Cam. So just very quickly, section 4 just highlights some key programmes, as Cam mentioned, that are data-driven. They've been implemented through using a data-driven approach. So Healthy Worcestershire, Work Well, Live Better, and the Community Wellbeing Grants. And I think it's just a really good demonstration, particularly the grant programme, of really tailoring and targeting intervention to where the need is presenting through the data that we are generating. The last bit of the report really is just showing kind of onward work. You know, we're working with the Health and Care Trust around mental health and looking at their services, particularly talking therapies, plugging that into our statistical process control methodology, so that statistical analysis to kind of help with understanding where activity is going on. Is it going on in the right places? Are there any deficits? And do we need to do things differently? And that's what this is all about. You know, it's about using data to challenge ourselves. Are we doing the right things in the right places at the right time for the right people? And we have quite sensitive methodology that we have developed and will continue to plug into services that could benefit. So it just leaves me to say thanks to the team in public health and partners as well for working on all of the projects and programmes that we've been describing. Yeah, really happy for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt and Cam. Thank you both. I've got Councillor Eacock to go first.
Thank you, Chair. My question's on priority neighbourhood resources. I actually live in Redditch, so I know a lot about what's going on there. Firstly, can you tell me if this data is easily accessible to the public? That's my first question, or is it just for councillors? Can I just the second part is, if I looked at my neighbourhood in there, would it break it down in districts like Central, Redditch South, East, West? Because I have a parish council as well out there. So would that be included in Redditch South figures?
Thanks for the question. Really good. Worcestershire Insights, which is the main repository, is publicly accessible, so anybody can go onto that resource and use it. It's just undergoing a bit of redevelopment to make it even easier to use. But as Cam mentioned earlier, if you have any specific questions about, a particular geography or profile, do get in touch and we can help you to access that information. The information will be broken down to as fine detail as you probably need, right down to geographies containing 400 homes. So it's really quite small geography, right up to districts and right up to county. So you can really cut and choose and pick and choose which level of data you want and which indicator and profile is of most interest to you.
Can I just come in there, Matt?
Yeah.
Yes, apologies. I forgot to mention there's a link just above paragraph 11 where people can request a profile. So we can generate a profile using this data and using other data for anybody who may find it difficult to access for themselves. So we have dealt with a number of queries from councillors from districts and parishes as well. Parishes are a little bit more complex with the data because you have to work through the definition of the area, but we can help with that if there are specific requests for that information. So, thanks.
Thank you. You wanted to come in to that?
Councillor Eacock, so I've actually just emailed the link to the priority neighbourhood development profiles, which I think are fantastic. And so they're proactively listed on the website. So, for example, I've just been looking at the data on Batchley Brook, or as we like to call it, LSOA EO1032234. But as Cam said, I'm so proud of the research and intelligence team because, when I first arrived, I set them a challenge because I think we were all a bit fed up with the old style JSNA. You could literally use it as a coffee table, this big weighty tome that would take months and months of work and then nobody would read it. And we got to the point where I think you both said it, that we want the data to be useful. We want to be responsive. So we've put some products, I like the fact that you call them products, on the website proactively, which we think are going to be particularly useful. But we also want people to come to us and say, could you do this analysis? Could you do that? We want to be alongside you all as you're doing your work, whether it be adult social care, children's, ICB, primary care, voluntary sector. We want to be able to be responsive to your needs for data. And for example, I met with David Mahaffey and Julian, I think it was yesterday, it feels like a long week already, where we were talking about us helping with some analysis about capacity planning. So yeah, we want to be of use. We want the data to be data products shaped by you, rather than the old style weighty JSNA, which I think's time has passed now.
Yeah, thanks Lisa, and thanks Matt and Cameron. I just wanted to reiterate a bit of what Lisa said really. The ability for health and care services to focus interventions on people who we know we can make the biggest difference to is critical, isn't it? We're going to need a much more data-driven and intelligent approach for this. I think we're really lucky in Worcestershire to have the quality of analytics support that we get, and I'm looking forward to a new era really of really focused and targeted joint work. We're going to talk about neighbourhood health next on the agenda, and the targeting of effort and resources on particular communities, particular households is a crucial part of that. Just a question for Matt. This is heavily reliant on our ability to share data effectively between the various agencies and partners. Are there any remaining barriers to those data sharing agreements that we're going to need to really take this on a stage or two?
Great question, Simon. The pilot, I guess you call it, or the data warehouse that the ICB is leading on, we're yet to see that. I think that's one of our biggest barriers at the moment, kind of the integration of data. So we can dip in and pull out, data ad hoc from kind of hospital episode statistics, so national databases. But local provision is so crucial. So we're really looking forward to that kind of capability. Onward from that, I think it's the challenge with primary care. Getting that linked up is going to be massively helpful to everybody. At the moment, for those of you that aren't really involved on a day-to-day basis, we can see who's been into hospital, but we can't see what other things are going on with those patients, what other conditions they have. We can see that they've been in with a broken hip, but we can't see that they're on meds that may make them dizzy or kind of cause the fall in the first place. So we can't do any of that joined at work, and that's what we're really looking forward to. Obviously, sharing data across VCSE partners as well, housing, etc., is so crucial. We've been talking about it for years, and I think all of us are getting to a point now where we just want to see something, a product that we can all kind of dip into and use. My only final point on that is around housing, actually. And it's one of the things that we're going to be focusing on this coming year. Because of the significant house building in new towns and kind of targets that are being set, that's going to radically change, or potentially radically change the need for healthcare, social care, every kind of care and education, etc., support that's needed across the whole system. So we need to get really much tighter on, I think, our grasp of what's coming along, when it's going to be built. I know Adam and your team have been contacting Children's Services, because I think you're actually very good and possibly furthest along in this thinking in the system. So I think we need to be looking at what's already being done and applying it to kind of areas of the system that perhaps aren't quite so long in that thinking, because it's going to become really significant. We can't forever just go, and developers as well, they can't just say, it's only another 25 homes or another 100 homes, because you only can do that so many times before the pressures mount and mount and mount, and the existing provision is no longer enough. So that's something that we really need to focus on, I think, in this coming year. And in next year's JSNA, I would hope that we'd be able to present something that shows us definitively, or as definitively as possible, this is the impact on our system and this is what we can do about it.
Thank you, as ever. I always love your presentations. I love the phrase you used about using this data to challenge ourselves. This is a room, we're all decision makers in this room at some level, and to some degree we're all experts, but often we don't know quite as much as we think we do. And I think the combination of what we talked about earlier about working closely with communities and then combining it with real powerful data gives us an opportunity to basically sort of rip up some holy cows and let's go for this and sort it out. So, I represent an organisation that's traditionally been very reactive. If you want help from the Citizen Advice Bureau, you go and find them. This data has motivated a project we're now doing in Redditch, where we're going out and we're knocking on doors and having conversations with people. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity, but I do agree we need to be able to look at ourselves, not just carry on doing what we used to do, but doing it in some slightly different places.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Neil.
Hi, everybody. I think it's my first time speaking at one of these meetings. I'm here representing primary care and general practice Worcestershire, really. I just wanted to reiterate everything that other people have said, positive reflections in terms of the Neighbourhood Health Delivery Framework, which, as you say, is a bit of a mouthful. The data that we've got, even though it's relatively disjointed, and I think your reflection about the pilot, Matt, is absolutely key. We want to be able to link and understand patients' barriers or populations' barriers all the way through, and we're slightly ham-fisted at the moment. It's a really moving forward to neighbourhood health is going to be absolutely essential, and making sure we target resource. The PCNs overall are really positive about this. It's definitely a new direction. Some of the Matt will have been on some of the meetings that I have where it's almost uncomfortable, and it's actually a desire to try and do everything to the best of our abilities, and start to get that toe in the water is really positive. We've done some work with Tanya over the summer about one of these LSOAs, one of these priority neighbourhoods, and we really couldn't understand what was going on, and the insights data that you've given out has been absolutely transformative, understanding that one of these LSOAs, 1 in 4 people doesn't have English as a first language, and there's a high number of single-person households. You think, well, if we'd have known that and framed the question and the problem in that setting, which we are now doing, you know, our intervention is going to be far more targeted and more appropriate. So, yeah, from our perspective in primary care, we're very positive about it. It's really exciting work moving forward, and thank you for that support.
Thanks for that, Dr. Pemble. I'm actually really proud of some of the conversations that we've had in kind of primary care and between public health and primary care. You know, just a few years ago, we would never have been in the place where we could have those conversations, but we're really shifting to a place. I think it's almost like change management, isn't it? Kind of moving from patients contacting the surgery and going in on a needs-based approach to shifting to primary care, thinking proactively about, okay, so what can we do preventatively with very defined communities? And it is a very, you know, it's a different approach, and one that I see almost the light bulb switching on. Oh yeah, you know, we can do something different as GPs and primary care colleagues, and there are different approaches that we can try. And I think central to all of this is we can't carry on doing the same things that we've always done with a changing population, changing needs, and, you know, pressures from all over the place. So it'll be really fascinating to see the evaluation from the NHDF. It'll be fascinating to hear reflections from clinical directors and GPs across primary care around what their experiences are and how they think it's gone, because there will always be change and refinement that we can make to you know, this conversation. And I don't think we haven't ended this journey yet. I think it is a bit of a journey of change. But yeah, again, in next year's Health and Wellbeing Board at this time next year, it'd be great to kind of have some reflections at that point as well.
I just want to echo that. It's lovely to hear about the data being used, and I would encourage all of you to do that. If you are finding our data useful, feedback to us and suggest, and it would be even more useful if we had this. I think it's that constant conversation that is really helpful. The other thing I want to emphasize about the sort of data analysis we've talked about is sometimes we use big phrases like statistical process control analyses, etc., just because we like to do that. But actually, these are really common sense analyses. You know, this is not advanced statistics, if I'm honest. And what's advanced about it is the way we use it and the relationship with clinical partners or social care partners, being led by them asking the right questions, and then us coming up with the right data cut to inform the work, and then circling round that iterative process. It's really interesting. You know, population health management has become a real buzzword, hasn't it, recently? And too often people associate population health management, and particularly the data side of that, with expensive, complicated software, statistical modelling software that an IT company will flog you for a 6-figure sum or more. And actually, as population health management has expanded in this country, people are starting to realise that those things aren't as useful as we first thought. Some of these really complex risk stratification modelling tools are not producing the goods, whereas actually just common sense analyses where we're layering maybe a demographic characteristic with 2 or 3 clinical vulnerabilities to identify, for example, who is at most risk if they don't have a flu vaccination, or who is at most risk of a fall. That more sort of simpler use of data to target is actually more effective and something we can do together as a community without necessarily having to spend big bucks on outside IT companies who will fly you to the world and back if you believe their literature and their website. But actually, when you sit down at it, all you are is a lot poorer in your budget and actually not necessarily engaged in the process and making real progress as a professional community. So I just want to emphasize that interactive part of this. Make requests to us, we'll feed back, tell us what was good about it and what was rubbish about it, and we'll keep that flow going. And that goes for everyone, voluntary sector, NHS, social care, and of course our elected members.
Thank you. Thank you both for presenting this report. I call it Big D report, data-driven description of dashboard, but there are many more Ds in this, determinates and delivery, isn't it? As primary care and ICB has said, it'll be really key to develop the plans once the data is, we share, and it's as important for our residents as well to have access and insights. A dashboard is really good, isn't it, for people to know where we stand for our health in county and what we need to do more, isn't it? So trailblazing, maybe another award coming your way?
At least one.
We'll make sure we rename it to Big D Report next year. Okay.
So next we have on agenda is neighborhood health, and Dr. Tanya Richardson is speaking on the report. I think Simon's going to contribute. And Simon,
I'll
you're
introduce
going to
it,
contribute.
if that's
Yeah.
okay, Councillor.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
sure
you.
We've got Tanya here, Sarah and Neil, who all were part of the authoring, so I will happily step in for Ellen and provide a bit of backdrop, really. This is designed as a bit of an introduction, I think, to the board, because neighbourhood health is going to be a big deal over the course of the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, certainly. So most of people in the room hopefully will have heard or read in the media about the government's 10-year plan for the NHS that was published earlier this summer. The 3 shifts within that, which are pretty typical of most of the 10-year plans we've had during the lifetime of the NHS, are listed on page 30 of your report. But probably the new bit and the exciting bit is a much greater focus on neighbourhood health. And we want to be testing and challenging ourselves to have a much greater emphasis and much greater resource allocation, much greater effort on the healthcare we are offering for people in neighbourhoods in a much more joined-up way, rather than the pretty hospital-centric models that have developed probably over the last decade. I think it's important for us all to recognise there's an important role for the Health and Wellbeing Board in this agenda. So the Health and Wellbeing Board, in governance terms, is being set up to actually being asked to oversee the development of neighbourhood health in Worcestershire, so that's going to be important. We've just spent time talking about joint work on data and analytics and an intelligence-led approach. I think that's an important focus that the board are going to need to have. And secondly, I guess we should be, in these meetings, challenging ourselves around the role we are each playing to support neighbourhood health. So yes, there's some really specific kind of general practice, hospital, NHS community services, NHS mental health services, adult social care interventions. But actually, for it to be successful, neighbourhood health models are going to need really good community buy-in. They're going to need really good signposting to voluntary sector support. We need to use it to build communities' resilience and self-sufficiency at the same time as focusing on how we can change our offer to be more integrated and joined up. And I personally think there's a massive productivity gain for us all in removing the duplication that often exists between people's efforts into communities. So the progress in Worcestershire is listed in the second half of the report, and page 31 I would draw your attention to. Section 8 lists the 6 key components, 6 core components of neighbourhood health models. We're awaiting further details as things stand nationally. So we've seen the 10-year plan. There's going to be some very specific guidance for local NHS areas around the further development of neighbourhood health model. So when that is received, I'm sure that will feature as part of a future report to the board. But yeah, this is designed as a scene setter, really, this document, so we can just set the scene and lay the foundations for hopefully what will be probably a big part of our agendas over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Simon.
Neil, do you want to go next, and Sarah, and then I'll follow up?
Thank you. Thank you for outlining that, Simon. It's building on what I said before, really. I think that neighbourhood health is a really exciting time for all of us. I think that we're fortunate in Worcestershire because, and Herefordshire, but Worcestershire specifically today, that the primary care network group of clinical directors, general practice Worcestershire is really strong, and we are, as a group, very keen to lead neighbourhoods. I think what we're trying to get our head around a little bit is the size of neighbourhoods, not necessarily trying to outline that today, but the fact that there are 2 levels of neighbourhoods, and actually maybe community healthcare would work for the PCN footprint aligned, and I think we're very keen as a group of clinical directors to work within that footprint. It's what we're familiar with, and with the district health collaboratives we've really started to focus how we work and the relationships. So the community healthcare, I'm going to start that as a strap line. I think that will be a good thing going forward. But that level, we're very. I feel we've got a good direction of travel and understanding, working with partners. The next level up, I think, is what we need to consider and how we make that most effective across what is quite a challenging footprint, actually, across Herefordshire and Worcestershire, with lots of change in terms of local government reform as well. But looking down these 6 core components, there's no part of this that actually I think that isn't really important to us providing care from a purely primary care perspective or general practice perspective. And I think we can do really well. And I think looking at these, supporting patients to live well in the community, to reduce hospital admissions, actually, as much as I'm sure from a system perspective, the cost is important to me. I want to focus on the cost to the person, to the patient, to support people to live well as they age and to remain independent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick comment from me. So I'm here representing the Acute Trust, the hospitals, and we really want to be a really good system partner. We want to be involved in the integration and leading in areas of this work where it's appropriate. We also really need to understand our communities better, and we need to understand, who's sitting on our waiting list at the moment, and where do they live, and what are the issues that surround them there. So this is really fundamental to us moving our care into the right place, which in a lot of cases won't be in the hospital, it'll be in the communities. And I think you can read through the information there, and it feels to me that we've got an opportunity here because we've got great relationships, we've got some really powerful, we've got data that's supporting what we're doing and some really powerful sort of enablers around what we're trying to do here. We now need to get on and figure out the places we can make the biggest impact. And I know that a few people have been out and looked at some work that they've done in Solihull, or East Birmingham anyway, around more integrated working that's around the neighbourhood model. And the bit that really sticks with me is, get the data right, get the relationships right, get a clear understanding of what we're trying to do. But I think the fundamental part that really sticks with me is that we're in that model, they're talking about our patients. They're not talking about a hospital patient or a patient who's going to see a GP. It's about understanding that it's people that we're all looking after and working as a system. So I'm really keen that we do everything we can from the hospital's perspective to make sure that we're a really key part of that.
Thank you. And from my perspective, I'm so excited by where we look at that diagram in the report, the connecting people who are accessing health and care services with those broader services in their local community. Hi, Ellen. And this is the opportunity for, I think, the Health and Wellbeing Board to link this work with all that we're driving through our health and wellbeing strategy to improve health and wellbeing across Worcestershire, to harness the connection of everybody in this room, the organisations represented in this room, but critically to listen to our communities, to listen to all the engagement that is going on, and for that to drive the plans that we put in place. So it's an exciting time for us, really, I think, to capitalise and for us to be very aspirational in what we want to deliver for the people of Worcestershire. I'll stop there. I don't know if Ellen wants to come in or Lisa while Ellen gets her breath. We've done the introductions, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Ellen, did you want to add in anything on the neighbourhood health?
No, I'm sure that the colleagues have introduced it, but happy to be part of taking questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So am I right in saying that this is an introduction for us of this plan going forward and all the stakeholders in this and the description, how you see yourself and what role each one of us would be playing in the plan going forward? So any questions from the members? Yes, Chris.
Yeah, sorry. We're in the voluntary sector. We're incredibly excited about this, to be honest, and delighted, Simon, Sarah, to hear you reference that sort of working together thing. This is an opportunity to come at something without maybe the history and the baggage that's existed before, and we're well aware that I've said it here before. I used to think the NHS was one single body. It is not. It's a very competitive group of territories, shall we call it that way? And the defending of those territories and budgets can sometimes be a bit of a blood sport, let's be honest. This is an opportunity to move right past that. And I do agree with the efficiencies thing. I think there's something there about, why if I've got workers on the ground speaking to people, should I not be talking about smoking cessation programs or encouraging people to go and get a blood pressure test because they're looking bright red in front of me and we need to do something there. In the same way, if we've got someone visiting someone in their home and they're seeing mold on the wall and there's a respiratory issue, yes, let's treat that, but also let's start speaking to people like myself or Act on Energy, who can come in and help deal with the underlying problem. So I think the key thing to this is joining it all up and, as you say, putting the patient stroke client, because ideally we don't even want to be a patient, actually we want to get to them beforehand, but this is a fantastic first step.
Yeah, I mean, obviously bound to focus around the co-production side of this, the engagement, and certainly for communities a massive shift in the way in which they perceive their healthcare being delivered, because a lot of them will see GP or hospital, right? And of course we're trying to remove the hospital to some extent, aren't we? Right. So I've got to ask the question about at what stage, and I've listened to Chris about the voluntary sector, but you talk about the voluntary sector as part of the workforce. So at what stage do we start the co-production process in terms of at least getting people switched into what the strategic direction is? Because at the moment, I've got to say, we listen to the Secretary of State talk about the NHS app, for example, and that you'll be able to go to hospital online and things like this. And I think that actually confuses people more and breeds cynicism more than it is helpful, to be quite honest with you, in talking about the change of analog to digital, for example, or from hospital to home. So I think there's really room to start thinking about how we're actually going to engage patients, the community, not patients, the community, and how we're actually going to deliver those messages and what those messages are going to look like.
As Simon alluded to a moment ago, actually, the detail is going to be really important before we know exactly how the local model will look, and we need that national guidance. But I think what we can do and are starting to do now with some events over the past couple of months is really trying to get hospital and community to start to work together. I think community as in primary care and the Health and Care Trust assets have worked together really well over the past few years, certainly actually even before primary care networks came on board. But understanding where is the most appropriate place for even that bit of somebody's care journey to do. Do people need to remain in hospital for lots of assessments to be done, or could they be seamlessly put into the community? So I think understanding the abilities, that's probably not quite the right word, of each part of the system, and then, as you say, taking away that barrier to who owns that asset. The person is the important thing, and that person is everybody's responsibility in the system, and I think that's what we can be doing over the next few months, really, to prepare us for the next stage.
Can I come back? Because just for example, a simple start is, people have heard me talk about, the public really don't identify with which trust is providing their service. They don't distinguish between, they don't know that the district nurses don't work for the GP, for example. And I do think a shift towards a brand of NHS, Herefordshire and Worcestershire, for example, and talking about the NHS as a collegiate body instead of, for example, public being directed to the Acute Trust website or the Health and Care Trust website, having one source of information, just to start that branding, for want of a better thing, start people thinking about that, would be a move in the right direction. Because at the moment, we're not seeing that. I mean, we continue to see, stories around the Acute Trust. And I know reputation is really important to everybody, but actually I don't think it's as important to patients as you all think it is, based on what I see being promoted. It might be important internally for your staff, to promote it for your staff, but actually patients, and as you know, the community aren't really concerned about that. And there's a real opportunity to sort of lose those divisions by actually losing the divisions that you impose yourselves. Just as a start of starting that conversation, starting people's mindset and changing their mindset away from, I either go to my GP or I go to hospital. And if not, don't go to hospital, I'm not getting a service.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Simon. And I think our collective responsibility is always to build public's confidence in services collectively. And you're right, they don't really care whether it's their GP practice they think they don't have confidence in, or the hospital, or the district nurse, or probably the council social care team. They would badge it all together as the public services that are supporting me. I was going to make the point, I think the patient engagement co-production stuff is a really important point to bring up. But linked to that as well, obviously we've got a lot of change coming in local government over the next few years. And I think as unitary council or councils start to develop, they will also need to strike that right balance between at scale economies of scale and size and kind of local community neighbourhood focus. And I think one of the areas that the Health and Wellbeing Board should keep an eye on is, as those structures evolve, those footprints for neighbourhoods or community committees or district collaboratives, whatever they are, that become part of the new unitary model, what we really need is, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get alignment with some of the NHS footprints. And the worst of all worlds would be if we ended up with kind of a load of totally uncomplimentary footprints. So actually, let's get the basics right. And if we're talking about, Neil's a GP in Evesham, and we're talking about Evesham's neighbourhood health model, let's make sure it's aligned to the wider public service model that exists in the unitary authority model. I think that would be, a logical area of focus for us as well.
I couldn't agree more. Wouldn't it be amazing if two public sector reforms actually were cited on each other? I think Simon's absolutely nailed it there. And in fact, I did speak to Simon and others. I was part of the team preparing the One Worcestershire LGR submission. And I spoke to Simon and others about, shall I actually make an explicit recommendation that as LGR develops, that it is cited on the emergence of neighbourhood health providers and the various footprints inherent in neighbourhood health, and why can't we join up as much as possible? Because people's needs in life don't come in neat boxes. That your health needs interact with your social care needs, which interact with a whole load of other needs. And wouldn't it be amazing if we could address them together? And that, behind that, is, I think, a really important point, is let's not fall into the trap of seeing neighbourhood health as just an NHS thing. Everyone on this board, everyone sat around needs to be asking, not what are you doing, NHS, it's what am I doing? Wasn't the American president who said something like that? Ask not what, whatever. But we all need to be...
Not the current one, maybe.
No. You could say that. I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah, about how we all contribute. So I'm really glad the Health and Wellbeing Board has oversight over this, but not to scrutinise NHS partners. Why aren't you doing this better? It's what are we doing in our bit of the world to contribute to this? And on that note, I think, and it raised the thought when you mentioned, Simon, patient engagement. Let's also not see neighbourhood health as something we're starting from scratch. We have a real proud tradition, don't we? And a couple of national awards for our community development work, for our health improvement services, for various aspects of NHS and social care. So why not see this as something that we build on? Let's collect together our strengths that already exist and build on that rather than feeling like we're ripping everything up and starting again.
Any comments? Yes, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to sort of a couple of points really felt I'd like to make, and one of them is in relation to, you know, I suppose the past. And I'm not trying to, you know, give anyone a history lesson here, if you like, in that sense. But a couple of decades ago, there was a very deliberate, you know, positioning in terms of how healthcare was delivered. And that was you had a competitive strategy in place, certainly in terms of NHS Foundation Trust were actually encouraged to do that. And to have that was the belief that would deliver better health outcomes if you had that competition, if you like, in the public sector marketplace. I think where we are now, it's a totally different sort of landscape in terms of it absolutely is about collaboration across the public sector and the wider sector to get the best we can for people and for the money that we have too. Really, that is the challenge in a sense. I think I am more optimistic. I think there is a broader plan in relation to how local government lands, and then where we end up with the strategic footprints in the future. So I do think there is a general direction of travel from a strategic point of view in terms of how all of those things come together at not just the, if I can say this, not just the ICB level, but then, as I say, that strategic footprint that will be in place, and presumably, if things continue as central government intend, we'll end up with a mayor at some point, won't we, delivering some of those functions across that strategic footprint. So as it stands at the moment, absolutely give my commitment in terms of making sure that we view adult social care from a neighbourhood footprint as much as a county footprint in that sense. But yeah, I think the ground now is there. I think you're right, Lisa. It's not starting from scratch. It's building from strength. And I think we have a lot of strengths across health and social care in this particular system. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's a really important perspective you have added, because adult social care is actually the majority part of the work in this, and you know, looking at the 6 core components, and it's pretty much falls in every component of that. So yeah, thank you. Any other questions or points to be made? Yes, Councillor Eacock.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on hospitals. Redditch has a population at the moment of roughly 89,000, Worcestershire 600 plus thousand, and we've got 2 hospitals, one in Redditch and one in Worcester. If we're going to get, as the government is asking, 30,000 more houses built in the next 2 to 5 years, what plans are in place to either increase the hospital or open one of the other hospitals that was closed down? Where are all these people, patients, going to go? What are the future plans? What's the timeline? Because at the moment, Redditch has a very big population of elderly people, and some of them are having to queue up in ambulances, not outside Redditch, because they're having to come to Worcester Hospital. My question is, are we going to get any extensions, or will they be ferried out to the county?
Yeah, I mean that's mainly a matter for the planning authority. So at the moment, that is a matter for the district councils who are producing the local plans, who are identifying where the housing growth is, who are negotiating with developers for the levels of contribution that are required to increase local infrastructure and facilities. It's more complicated than that though, isn't it? Because actually what we're talking about is we're trying to change the way health services, care services in general work, and reduce the reliance on the hospital and the ambulance and the A&E department, because we're looking through this work to have a much more enhanced community model, which means we can look after people without having to take them to hospital. I mean, I would say Councillor Eacott, Redditch Hospital, I've worked in the NHS in this part of the world for 17 years now. I would say Redditch Hospital's probably had close to £100 million of capital investment during that time. It continues to grow and grow and grow. The changes that have been made over that period were nothing to do with the state or the size of the buildings. They were all to do with the availability of suitably qualified specialist staff to deliver some of the specialist pathways. That's something that will always have to be kept under review. Technology changes, medicine changes, practice changes, best practice guidance changes from people like NICE who set all this stuff. The availability of trainees coming out, graduating from university and other training establishments changes as well. So you can never say never, but any of the changes that were made to Redditch, none of them were made because of physical estate and assets. There's loads of space around the Alexandra Hospital, as you well know. It's really well located for expansion. That will always be to do with the availability of qualified staff. But I think it's a genuine question that we are asking, and we need to keep asking the planning authorities that, you know, Vic was here a while ago. He's building a new town, isn't he, just outside, between here and Worcester, 5,000 extra houses, 10,000 extra people. Yeah, they'll need a GP practice, won't they? We'll need to make appropriate adjustments to our hospital capacity. We'll need the right kind of neighbourhood health facilities for them to use. All of those things need to form part of the planning process, which district and borough councils own as things stand today.
Thanks. And apologies if you covered some of this earlier. But it is worth also sharing that a team from our system visited one of the forerunners of the neighbourhood health model in Birmingham, a community around Washwood Heath. And actually the learning from that example was really stark in terms of the opportunity by coordinating care more effectively to actually reduce the number of contacts that were needed overall. And that isn't just about reducing input from the NHS, it's about really valuing patients' time. So it was a range of between 20 and 40%, so contact with GPs and hospitals. Interestingly, the one area that did need increased input was from mental health, because what actually transpired was that people needed more mental health support. But overall, I think that's also the opportunity we've got here, is that some of our use of core services can be more efficient and therefore more effective, and therefore support with some of the growth that we're seeing in need in the population.
Well, just a very quick one raised by the Section 106 and the concept of, I think, through the future of acute hospital services in Worcestershire, we configured our acute services so they weren't geographically based, perhaps with the exception of A&E. But otherwise, but it then was about not where you lived, but the speciality you were seeking to access, as far as our hospital services were concerned. So it would be perfectly possible for houses that are built in North Worcestershire, for example, to place a big burden on a hospital that sits in Worcester City. And this is one for Vic really, I suppose, our district councils working collegiately to say, well, actually, we recognise there's going to be a demand on health service, but it might not fall within our district council area. So it was just really to run one up the mast for that, to be honest with you. And it was certainly a question, because when I read the Homes England public report on the new town, it didn't mention health services. It talked about every service other, like playgrounds and a school, and I thought that's interesting. given that we've just decided not to build a school in Worcester but ship our children, as I understand it, to Malvern and across to Malvern. But it didn't mention health services, so we will be trying to attend the Homes England consultation event that they're running.
This is one of the things that we picked up actually a couple of years ago, probably at one of our first district health collaborative meetings, that 10,000 people actually just need a brand new GP surgery, because knowing the footprint of the guys who work really hard in Pershore, you can't just add these people on, and Matt was reflecting this earlier. There comes a point at which you get little bits of extra, and suddenly my practice has gone up by 1,000 in the last 5 years, and you think that's actually, especially when we're trying to move care from the acute sector into community sector and do things in a different way, that is a huge challenge, and certainly some of the estates, specifically in Redditch, I know are very challenged. How are we actually going to provide this? But I don't think that should stop us aspirationally starting to move that way. We know that every pound spent in primary care or in the community is much more efficiently spent than that in the hospital, so perhaps having that as our aspiration rather than thinking how do we make these places bigger and bigger, because that's where patients spend most of their life. So the 106 thing for primary care is equally challenging, but yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll be very upset if they find they've not got a new health centre for 10,000 houses, but we'll come on to that.
So, a sense we're getting close to the end of the discussion. So, I don't know whether Simon or Ellen or anyone wants to answer this, but what are the next big steps then on the journey, the neighbourhood health journey, and how can we all contribute?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Well, I'm not sure if I would describe it as big steps, but I think we're on a consistent evolution now. And you talked about this already, but we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. So there's lots of great examples of things already happening around our system. So some of, I think, what we're looking to do is to learn from the things that are working well, think about that adoption and spread. So we don't have our examples of good practice happening everywhere yet. I think you made the point as well already about us being really clear sort of once and for all what our footprints are going to look like for some of the services that we operate at that slightly bigger scale. So there will be things that obviously will operate for practices and at that level, but then there probably is something in between that and the county level, recognising, I think, as we've heard about the importance of some of those local communities like Redditch and what happens around that tier. And wouldn't it be just wonderful if we do get that alignment with the local government reforms? So I think we need to stay close together and think about the opportunities there. So I think it's now about, we're on a journey of evolution, of trying to take the best and spread it to the rest, if that's the term, to think about the right scale for some of the services that are not at practice level but not at county level, staying close together on that. Thinking about how we wrap in the offer from other colleagues around this room, so it isn't just about the NHS, but it's about those wider determinants of health. Yeah, and really just, I think the final thing I would just say today is, how would the Health and Wellbeing Board like to stay informed, connected, linked into this agenda? Is it a regular update through here? It would just be useful to know how we can best do that as we move forward. Thank you.
I think that's a really good question, and I think one thing we should really bear in mind about what we are as a board, or rather what we're not a scrutiny panel. And I think this board's quite good at not falling into the trap of forgetting that and acting like a scrutiny panel. So I think yes, updates on progress, I think, be really helpful, but also requests. You've got public health, you've got voluntary sector, social care, elected members, Health Watch. I think we're all really keen to play our part in this. So I think, scrutiny panels, you'll have plenty of those to go to as well, where they'll take a backwards view on what progress has been made. But I think these meetings should look forward about, okay, here we are, what can we do next? what can public health contribute? What can Chris take back to the voluntary sector? What role do we want elected members to play next? So more asks of those coordinating the programme to us as a board, rather than the board asking you or anyone else, how much progress have you made? Does that make sense? Let's not be a scrutiny panel in this board. Let's be part of the team.
Hi, sorry. Thank you for letting me chip in on that, Councillor Bell. I wonder around development sessions, rather than using Health and Wellbeing Board just as an opportunity to come and sort of tick a box or report on progress. There's like really key voices around the table, and we are able to have development sessions to sort of engage partners on the direction of travel, rather than always through just a formal report. There probably will come points in the development of the planning where there could be a different sort of more interactive sessions for Health and Wellbeing Board members to contribute to.
Thank you, Sam. Just a question to ICBL or Simon. I think you mentioned about Washwood Heath practice in Birmingham, which I understand is a sort of super practice. And we've been talking about these super practices for a while. Now, when we look at this Department of Health or Secretary of State, he announced some time back, there are going to be super urgent care centers, and there's some money set aside for, and we are not in that list. Worcestershire is not there. So I think our residents for this neighborhood health plan, of course, we are in introductory plan, and we said we're not starting from scratch, but our residents ought to know, they have right to know how it is going to look like. Is this already existing practices are going to be super practices to deliver that, or are they going to be brand new urgent care centers, or what is going to look like from acute trust point of view? That's what we want to know, isn't it? Where those patients are going to be seen. Because right now what's happening, there are 30 to 40% attendance is non-warranted in the acute trust. They can be seen somewhere else. Because we fragmented the community care, we developed walk-in centers, we developed injury units. Nobody knows who needs to go where. So that's something my question is on behalf of all our residents.
Yeah, that is in the 10-year plan that they will have neighbourhood health centres. I don't think we need any new neighbourhood health centres in Worcestershire. I think there's one possible exception when I look at our existing primary care estate, which might be Redditch, actually, for Councillor Eacock's information, where we've got a lot of smaller practices with less good quality estate. For most of the rest of Worcestershire, certainly in Wyre Forest, we've got some of the best GP estate in the country, and certainly in South Worcestershire and parts of Bromsgrove, we've got really good GP estate. Our aim will be to use the existing premises that we've got, and maybe even some partner buildings. The County Council have got a lot of estates and assets, as have the District Council. I don't see us bidding for capital investment in neighbourhood health centres. I don't think we need it. And actually, the capital may well come nationally, but they'll ask for the revenue to be funded locally. And if we've got revenue funding spare, it would be much better off in Worcestershire going into additional capacity in neighbourhood teams, integrated teams, into mental health teams, into voluntary sector support. So I'm not envisaging any big capital schemes, with the possible exception of Redditch. But we need to see the rules and how much money is available and how we might even access that. I think your wider point on the fragmentation of the system is a really good one. And that's another good challenge for us, isn't it? To make sure that we use the development of this more joined up offer to get rid of some of the confusion, and to say, actually, no, here's your single point of access for your local team in Evesham. Just ring, you don't need to go anywhere else. Just go through this door and we'll sort out everything that needs to happen from beyond there. When we get that right, it's a lot more easier for patients, and that's where we should be focused.